Imagine stepping into a place you know really well, a local estuary maybe, or a wetland you visit often. You see a common species, like a familiar type of reed or a small fish.
Like something you recognize.
Exactly. And you think, okay, I know you belong here, or, well, at least you've seen it around for years. But what if that creature, the one you think you know,
What if it's actually something else entirely?
yeah, what if it's an aggressive foreign competitor? Genetically distinct, spreading fast, maybe even pushing the locals out, all while looking exactly the same.
That invisible invasion, that hidden conflict. That's what we're digging into today.
We're launching a deep dive based on a really interesting review paper, Cryptic Invasions, a review published by Pedro Morais and Martin Reichard back in 2018.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece.
Our mission today is pretty straightforward, but I think really crucial. We want to understand what these cryptic invasions actually are,
Why they matter, why they seem to be so under the radar.
and what their hidden presence means for biodiversity globally. Because, the paper argues we might be looking at one of the biggest blind spots in invasion science.
Definitely. So to kick things off, let's get that definition clear. What is a cryptic invasion?
Well, fundamentally, it's hidden. You can't spot it just by looking, not with standard surveys.
And the authors break it down into two main types. The first one they call interspecific cryptic invasion.
Okay.
That's when a non-native species invades, but it looks so much like a native species, or sometimes even another invader that's already established, that scientists just, well, mistake it.
Like that sea squirt example they mentioned, Siona savigny. It gets misidentified as the similar-looking Siona intestinalis.
Exactly, a case of mistaken identity at the species level. But the second type, that one's maybe even sneakier.
Go on.
Intraspecific cryptic invasion. This is where a non-native lineage, like a specific genetic strain of a species, invades an area where the native lineage of that exact same species already lives.
Whoa, so the species itself isn't new to the area. But a foreign version arrives and starts taking over from the inside. Like the common reed, Phragmites australis, example. We have native Phragmites in North America.
Yeah.
But then this European genotype shows up. Looks the same species name, but it's ecologically different and way more aggressive.
Precisely. And that ties into the paper's core argument, which I find really compelling.
Which
That
is?
many of these sudden population booms or these rapid range expansions we've seen, the ones we often blame on things like climate change,
Yeah.
they might actually be driven by these unrecognized cryptic invaders, these lineages that are just competitively superior.
That
Yeah.
suggests a potentially huge blind spot. Just how big could this hidden problem be?
Well, the paper did this bibliometric analysis looking at published studies, and the finding was pretty stark.
How stark?
Studies explicitly using the term cryptic invasion.
Yeah.
They represented less than 0.6% of all biological invasion studies published up to 2016.
Less than 0.6%. Wow.
Yeah, fewer than 1 in 150 papers were directly addressing this. It's just not commonly recognized or maybe not easily studied.
And is the research that is getting done focused differently than general invasion biology? Because invasion science often looks at, big terrestrial plants or animals, things you can easily see.
That's a good point. And yes, there's a definite bias. Cryptic invasion research leans heavily towards aquatic environments. About a third freshwater, a quarter marine.
Huh. Maybe because things are harder to see underwater anyway.
Could be part of it. And it's also biased towards animals. They accounted for about 63% of the cryptic invasion studies they looked at. It's quite different from the overall focus in invasion biology.
Okay, so if they look the same, how on earth do researchers figure out it's a cryptic invasion? Visual ID, morphology must be almost useless, right?
Pretty much, yeah. The paper found only about 15% of studies relied only on morphology. It's just not reliable enough in these cases.
So it has to be genetics.
Overwhelmingly, yes. Molecular data is key.
Yeah.
About 58% of the detections used purely genetic methods, and another 22% combined genetics with morphology.
So we're talking DNA markers, population genetics, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Mitochondrial DNA, nuclear markers. You need that molecular toolkit to tease apart these visually identical but genetically distinct lineages.
This is where it gets really cool, I think. Using the past to solve present-day ecological mysteries. The role of museum specimens.
Oh, yeah, that's a really powerful angle. Archived specimens, things stored in museums, herbaria, voucher collections.
Right.
They were only used in about 21% of the studies reviewed. But the paper stresses they provide the strongest evidence
How so?
because they give you a historical baseline.
Yeah.
You can compare the DNA from samples collected today with DNA from samples collected decades or even centuries ago.
Like genetic time travel.
Exactly. It allows researchers to pinpoint when an invasion likely happened and maybe even where the invader came from. They mentioned it was crucial for figuring out the history of the European green crab, Carcinus minus, in the Northwest Atlantic.
Okay, so we have ways, mostly genetic, to find them. But once identified, what actually makes these genetic imposters so successful? What gives them the edge?
Well, the drivers are often linked, unsurprisingly, to human activities.
Like what?
The usual suspects, really. Global transport is a big one. Things like ballast water spreading the spiny water flea by the traphys, hull fouling, even ballast sediment carrying things like the invasive phragmites, seeds, or rhizomes.
And not just transport, but changing the environment itself.
Right. Building canals, for instance, that connect river basins that were previously isolated. Suddenly, a lineage adapted to one basin gets introduced to another, where it might outcompete the local lineage.
Let's dig into those competitive advantages. The paper mentions enemy release. How does that work when the invader is technically the same species as the native?
It's about coevolution, or the lack thereof. The non-native lineage arrives, but it leaves behind its specific predators, parasites, and pathogens from its home range.
Okay.
And the native enemies in the new range might not be adapted to attack this new lineage effectively. The Phragmites example illustrates this really well.
The common reed again?
Yeah, the invasive European lineage in North America is much less bothered by native North American herbivores compared to the native Phragmites lineage.
Ah, so it gets a break from herbivory.
But it gets worse. There's also evidence that the native lineage is actually more susceptible to some herbivores that were introduced alongside the invasive reed.
Wow, so the invader gets less pressure and the native gets more pressure from new enemies?
Exactly. It's like a double whammy, really tilting the competitive balance.
Okay, what else? The paper mentions heterosis or hybrid vigor.
Right. This is the idea that when you cross two genetically distinct lineages, the hybrid offspring can sometimes be more robust, more vigorous
Right.
than either parent lineage. Increased genetic diversity, basically.
Does this hybridization frequently lead to, like, a super invader?
The paper suggests the overall evidence for heterosis guaranteeing invasion success is still a bit mixed or inconclusive, but it's definitely relevant in some cases.
Any examples?
Yeah, they mentioned hybrid water fleas, Daphnia, in the Great Lakes. These hybrid clones managed to establish where the non-hybridized non-native forms couldn't quite make it.
And within the same species. Intraspecific.
Yes, there's an example with the common yellow monkey flower, Mimulus caudatus. Experiments showed clear hybrid vigor when native and non-native lineages crossed the hybrids had significantly better growth and reproduction.
Interesting. So sometimes it's the mixing, but sometimes maybe the invading lineage just has better traits to begin with.
Absolutely. Specific adaptations can make a huge difference. Think about physiological tolerances.
Wait.
The invasive Phragmites, again, the European lineage, often shows increased salt tolerance and faster biomass production compared to the native one. That helps it dominate coastal wetlands.
Or adapting to human-changed environments.
Definitely. The red rim Melania snail, Melanoides tuberculata. The invasive Asian lineage seems to thrive near dense human populations in Africa, possibly because it's better at handling things like pollution, eutrophication, or disturbed habitats.
And then there's resistance, like pesticide resistance.
Huge factor in agricultural systems. The Q biotype of the whitefly, Bemisia tabaci, invading China, it's just much more resistant to common pesticides than the native bee biotype.
So it just survives the spraying that kills off the natives.
Pretty much. A clear physiological advantage leading to rapid replacement in croplands.
Okay, this next one is wild. Sexual selection actually driving invasion. How does that work?
Yeah, the rosy bitterling example, Rhodius ocellatus, is fascinating. It turns out the females, both native and invasive females, strongly prefer mating with the non-native males.
They prefer the invaders. Why?
The paper doesn't detail the exact mechanism for the preference, but the consequence is clear. Bitterlings have this mating system where only a few males get most of the reproductive success, high reproductive skew. So if females overwhelmingly choose the non-native males, those males father almost all the offspring, and the native male lineage just gets swamped out incredibly quickly. Behavior driving replacement.
So the impacts aren't just ecological competition, they're evolutionary. These invasions are fundamentally changing the genetic landscape.
Absolutely. They can lead to genetic homogenization, basically,
Yeah.
wiping out unique, locally adapted native genotypes. The loss of the distinct Japanese rosy bitterling lineage is a prime example. That genetic diversity is just gone.
And what about the broader ecosystem, the ripple effects?
Well, sometimes the invader takes on a new role. That invasive red alga, Gracilaria, can act as an ecosystem engineer.
Right.
It creates new habitat structure that some native species might actually use.
So not always bad initially.
Potentially not in every single aspect, but the overall picture is usually negative. Think about invasive phragmites or reed canary grass dominating wetlands.
Right.
That leads to lower local plant diversity, fewer arthropods, impacts on small mammal communities, the classic negative impacts of dominant invaders.
And the paper really flags the disruption of co-evolved relationships as a critical issue.
Yes, this is super important and often overlooked. Think about species that depend on each other in very specific ways.
Like parasites and hosts.
Exactly. They use the example of the thick-shelled river mussel, Uniocrassus. It's endangered, and its larvae need to attach to specific, locally adapted fish hosts to develop.
Okay.
But widespread fish stocking often introduces non-native populations or even non-native lineages of those host fish species,
And the mussel larvae can't use the new fish.
or their development success is much lower. The co-evolved lock and key fit is broken because the host fish population is no longer the one the local mussels evolved with. It can be devastating for the dependent species.
Wow. Okay, so managing an invader you literally can't see easily. That sounds like a nightmare.
It's a massive challenge, no doubt. Management has to be lineage specific. You can't just treat all phragmites the same, for example.
Which means you need those difficult, often expensive identification techniques. Genetic testing in the field, maybe?
Which isn't always practical. But there is hope on the horizon, particularly for early detection. The paper points to environmental DNA, eDNA.
Right, detecting DNA traces left behind in water or soil.
Exactly. It's shown huge promise. One study found eDNA surveys were over 5 times more efficient at detecting the American bullfrog than traditional visual or auditory surveys.
So, could this work for cryptic lineages?
Potentially, yes. If we know the unique genetic signature of the invasive lineage versus the native one, we could develop eDNA assays to specifically screen for the invader's DNA in environmental samples.
That could be a game changer for early warning.
It could. The big hurdle, though, is developing those lineage-specific reference libraries. We need to know exactly what genetic sequence we're looking for all the problematic cryptic invaders pests, things spread by ballast water, etc. That takes time and research.
Okay, and towards the end, the paper raises this really complex, almost philosophical issue, the genetic arc idea.
Yeah, this is where conservation gets really tricky, especially with intraspecific invasions where there's been a lot of hybridization.
What's the dilemma?
Well, imagine a native lineage is really struggling. Maybe it's suffering from inbreeding depression or its habitat is degrading. And meanwhile, this closely related, hybridized, partly non-native lineage is thriving and expanding.
Okay.
Do you view that expanding lineage strictly as an invader that needs to be controlled? Or could it potentially be seen as a genetic arc? A source of genetic diversity that might actually help the overall species persist, even if it means losing the pure native lineage.
That's a tough call. Like the Tokyo bitterling case they mentioned, where newly found populations were already heavily hybridized.
Exactly. Do you manage them as endangered natives,
Yeah.
trying to preserve what's left? Or treat them as genetically compromised invaders?
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, and the decisions have really long-term, irreversible evolutionary consequences.
It really underscores the paper's main conclusion, doesn't it? That we have to shift how we think about invasions.
Absolutely. It's not always about species versus species. Often, the key differences, the reasons for success, the mechanisms, the impacts they operate at the population or lineage level.
Which makes understanding and managing biological invasions way more complex than we thought. You can't just have a single strategy for a whole species anymore.
Precisely. You need to understand the genetic players involved. The cryptic nature of many invasions forces us to confront that complexity head-on.
The big takeaway seems to be that some of the most successful, most impactful invaders might be the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing the disguise of a familiar face.
Exactly. Driving ecological changes we might be misattributing to other causes, all because they look like something we thought we knew.
It definitely makes you pause and think about the ecosystems around us. That common plant or fish, could it actually be part of a hidden takeover? An army of unknown invaders disguised as natives.
A slightly unsettling thought, but a crucial one for conservation and management going forward.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.